Bernard Tobin here from RealAgriculture.com. Today we're at the World Dairy Expo and I'm joined by Mark Stephenson. Mark, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome, Bernard.
Now you are the Director of Policy Analysis, Dairy Policy Analysis for the at the University of Wisconsin. And today I want to talk a little bit about the dairy industry in the U.S., what's happening, a little bit about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and overall some perspectives on, some U.S. perspectives on supply management. Let's start it off. Last year I was here. Dairy farmers were all smiles. Milk was at about $25 per hectoliter. Now we're down about 15. It's been a tough year.
Well, it's been a recovery kind of year, I guess, in a lot of ways for folks. That last year was an abnormally great year, and in my opinion, it was probably a year of a generation. So, in other words, it was the best that a whole generation may see. And people were feeling pretty good when they came last year. A lot of things to spend money on, and they had some money in their pocket.
Yeah. So what's happened this year? I mean, obviously, you've got some export challenges. You've got a lot of milk, a glut. What are the conditions like?
Well, if you look at the entire U.S., we don't actually have a glut. But what we have are some very different kinds of milk production patterns going on in the country. It's a big country after all. The Northeast and the upper Midwest here has plenty of milk. We've had a hard time even finding plant capacity to handle all the milk we've been producing. But the western states, which have typically been our big milk growing states, have been in decline. So they've faced some very different kinds of numbers. Nationally, not a glut, but in some regions, plenty of milk.
Right. What's the situation in Wisconsin here right now?
Wisconsin's plants are full. We haven't had the same kind of problems or issues that plants a little further east have had. We've had quite a bit of milk that's actually come into Wisconsin to find a processing home, but the plants are full.
Let's talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. A big item on the Canadians' agenda. We're probably going to hear some news this week. There's talk of the partners getting access to 10% of Canada's market and making a dent in supply management. What's the perspective on that down here?
Well, I mean, obviously, we would like to see opportunities for trade any place we can, and of course, it's always better with your near neighbors. We had a lot of discussion about this at the time we were talking about NAFTA, and we had free trade that was ultimately negotiated with Mexico, but not with Canada in dairy products. So, liberalization of trade would be viewed as a positive development for us.
Now, how aggressive has the U.S. administration and dairy farmers in Wisconsin, how aggressive have they been in the push to access and get a piece of that in the TPP?
Well, I think that our trade negotiators would have to be the ones that really would talk about that, but I think that there's been more push this time. There's been a lot of feeling that in the past trade negotiations, not just with Canada, but with many other countries, whether they've been multilateral or just single trade pacts that have been negotiated, that we've given up too easily, especially on dairy trade, and they probably were trying to hold the line a little bit more this time. And of course, we're getting pushed on the other side of things too. New Zealand wants more access to U.S. markets than they've had in this TPP, so we're all looking at having to open up a little bit.
How important is that 10% of a Canadian market to U.S. farmers, to Wisconsin farmers?
Well, I think that U.S. farmers would do fine whether we got that or not. But the idea would be that it would offer some opportunities for us. Years ago, when we were looking at NAFTA agreements, we did a little bit of trade modeling to try to decide what would happen, who would benefit and who would lose. In the Canadian provinces, for the most part, your large milk producing regions are in the east, and to the extent that product moves at all in Canada, it goes east to west. In the U.S., our large surplus has been in the west, and products tend to go west to east. And when we opened the model up and said, pretend there's no trade problems here between the countries, we found that it made more sense to trade north and south. And actually, the northeastern provinces, Quebec and Ontario, were sending dairy products in that trade model down into the northeast that is milk deficit. So it's not a complete loss for Canada to think about having opportunities for freer trade.
What's the sense of supply management going forward? Obviously, you'd like to push into that market and get some of that. What's the attitude towards supply management? I mean, is it something that the U.S. farmer would like to see done away with, or are you happy to have a little piece of that market?
Well, that's a very controversial point of discussion in this country. Our farm bill that was passed this last year, the dairy portions of that had a piece that was kind of soft supply management. It would not have allowed farmers to grow more than what they had in previous year without penalty of milk production if in fact milk prices began to collapse. So it's kind of a soft supply management and a moving target. And that became one of the most controversial pieces in all of the Farm Bill, which is a big piece of legislation. And our Speaker of the House said, I won't even bring it up to the floor if that's included. So it's controversial. And some farmers would like to have it here. Many of them, absolutely not. Don't put the shackles on me.
Do you expect to hear that something will come out of the TTP negotiations in Atlanta this week? We're in the middle of a Canadian election
Yeah,
in
I
Canada,
know.
and
The 19th, right?
It's the 19th, and it's a tough deal to do and get elected. What's your sense of what's going to happen?
Well, I'm not a big enough student of Canadian elections to know what's going to happen, but as I understand it, things are pretty close.
Yeah.
And we have to recognize that these trade negotiations are about a lot more than just agriculture or just dairy. It's about a great deal more than that. So the U.S., when they're doing this, has to think about what do I give up, in the way of dairy versus what we gain in the way of intellectual rights or some other things that might be traded. And Canada has to do the same kind of thing. So, I'm sure that the Prime Minister and others are worried a great deal about what they're going to have to do to play in a trade agreement.
Hey, final question for you. I mean, you've got milk at about $15 a hectoliter. If you get access to 10% of the market in Canada, any sense of what milk might move across the border at from a price perspective?
Oh, I think that some certainly would, but I wouldn't expect it to be a gusher up there.
Yeah.
We have to look at all of our trade opportunities. Where are we likely to sell? What are the prices likely to be? Canada, of course, has the appeal of being close. And from a Canadian perspective, I mean, if I'm looking at Canada and saying, wow, is this something I want to avoid at all costs? If you go back to the most elemental things you've got, what are your agronomic resources for producing milk up there? You've got fantastic resources. You've got the kind of thing that we've got here in Wisconsin, but a lot more of it. You've got cooler climates, you've got great resources for growing the crops that support a dairy agriculture. So I think that the opportunity in the long run is very positive for Canada, but it always hurts when you have to change policy.
That's for sure. Hey, Mark, thank you for your time today. Appreciate it, and thanks for dropping by and visiting us at realagriculture.com.
You're very welcome.